Patrick Johnston, I am so used to talking to you at this time of year where we're focusing on draft simulators and where do they need the most help and how much money will they spend in free agency and which stupid free agent will they overspend on because they want to be. And we actually get to talk about hockey this time of year. So before we get into it, I just want to thank everyone for watching, listening, reading. Tell you about some fun stuff we've got. We're going to try and do these videos twice a week. We're going to be holding post-game Q&As the day after a game, mostly with Patrick. We may work Coos into the mix as well, or whoever else is around, depending on schedules, and we're trying to negotiate on practice. But you can leave your questions the night after a game. We'll have a file set up, and Patrick will answer them in the morning. We did our first one yesterday. We're going to do another one on Friday morning, and then all through next week. We have playoff posters. This goes back to the 90s. If you collected the old playoff posters done by the province, we're continuing that both digital and in print. Again, game days will be the focus of that. What else? We'll have loads of other great stuff, tweaking our formats a little bit, but we're going to overload you on Canucks stuff because we have all of June and July to talk about draft and free agency, right, Patrick? Because the Canucks are going all the way. So let's get into it. Canucks Predators, that's what really matters. Let's start with the most important thing. Are they going to win the series, and in how many games?
Oh, they're going to win the series. I think it'll be 6 games. I mean, Nashville has had a strong year. They can score. They've since almost. I mean, I'm trying to think whether it's New Year, but the last couple of months, essentially the same record as the Canucks. Now, obviously, they've had some stumbles lately, but I think the truth is they give up a lot of shots. They give up a lot of goals as a result. The Canucks have feasted in those kinds of scenarios, and at the end of the day, the Canucks have basically, as of right now, have given up the 5th fewest goals in the NHL, and that's likely to be the story after tonight. After tonight's season finale in Winnipeg, like the Canucks have been a strong defensive team. That's been a quietly under discussed story this year, which is no shock if you paid attention to Rick Tocchet and what he was doing in Arizona. He had success in Arizona because he took a not terribly talented team and got them to work hard in their own end and build their way out. And this is a much more talented team than he had there. So at the end of the day, it comes down to sort of overall play, firepower, finishing ability, play of the goalie. And I think it all adds up to a 6 games, 4-2 series win for the Vancouver Canucks.
We've done some stuff on this podcast before, and we asked polls on most of our stories, podcast, video, whatever you want to, however you listen to it. Anyhow, about who gets credit for what. And it's so funny because, again, the fact that we have sort of real playoffs here for the first time in 9 years, I do recall how many times, going back to when we had Ed Willis on these, on whatever forum we were doing, about the Canucks defense and how their defense was terrible and how if they didn't have their goalie, that they would be like the worst team in the NHL every single season, and that this was Jim Benning's task, was to fix the defense. And I do look at it now, and I think I don't know if Tocchet's underappreciated or overappreciated, or appreciated just right. But when you look at defensively how they play, how they've remade the team, they've got Quinn Hughes adding the desired offense from the blue line, which was so much the focus. But it's the way that they play in their own end as a system, and getting everyone to buy into their role. Like, I'm a little, I guess your impressions, because you have a good relationship with Tocchet, I'm a little surprised that, you say he had success in Arizona and it wasn't a very good team, but did they really have success? Like, I don't think Tocchet was at the top of the list of coaches that people needed to have on. And yet you look at this job he's done with the Canucks, whatever happens, I'm sure they're going to try and extend him when his contract is up. But he's built himself into a hot commodity with what he's done with this group.
Absolutely. I don't sleep on that 2019-20 team. I mean, they were stumbling a bit when the pandemic started. Listen, let's be clear on that. But they've been they were above 500. They in the end made the playoffs, whatever those mean. And we talk a little bit about that yesterday, and asked him and Elias Pettersson, basically, did your success, the Canucks' success anyway, does it mean anything from 2020? Does it mean anything for now? And Petey, absolutely not. It was awful.
That was great. That was great stuff from him.
It was a great, a great honest response from him about And that he had 18 points in 17 games in the bubble, like a terrible experience for everyone. The players felt like they were in jail. Like, they understand how fortunate they were to get to do what they love, but at the end, it's not something they want to go and do again. And at the end of the day, as Tocchet said, listen, you had teams that didn't want to be there, right? Like you had players that were trying to get, players were ready to go before the games were over, and credit to the Lightning and the Dallas Stars who battled all the way to the end, got to the finish line. But at the end of the day, it's just not the same. It's not the same energy. I mean, Brock Besser, you could see the way he reacted when he was asked in our scrum yesterday about the idea of the crowd noise and the comparisons, say, with like the last Sedin's game. Besser was there. He was, as he pointed out, he wasn't playing. He was injured. He was watching from above. But the energy in the building of the last Sedin's game in 2018 was comparable to a playoff game. The fans were boisterous. They were joyous. They were loud.
It was, man, so tight.
Yeah, it was so tight. It was like
just like a playoff game.
And Besser's face lit up, like the body language was everything. His face lit up. He stood taller, like you knew how excited he was for what's coming. And to go back to your question about what Tocchet's done, I mean, he's learned. He told us some anecdotes about sort of leadership things he learned in that environment that made him a better coach. I think has led him to being I think he was already a very empathetic person and very strong very strong emotional intelligence, understands, person to person, what they need to hear, what they need to see, how to motivate them. That JT Miller responds differently from Elias Pettersson, or Quinn Hughes, or, that go on and on. That is the ultimate challenge for a coach. And he clearly has hit every nail on the head here in Vancouver. Like, he has gotten this group to a place that they didn't understand they could get to, I don't think. I mean, that is the ultimate challenge for the coach. And Ian Cole making the point that, when I asked him about playing in the playoffs all the time, he said, well, good teams make the playoffs, right? Pardon me. If you think you're good, get in the playoffs. Like, if you aren't in the playoffs, you're not good. Only bad teams don't make the playoffs. And so that requires an extra level of dedication, extra level of focus. And he's got his players here, and they believe it, and they bought in, and they're going into the playoffs, not just as a playoff team, but as a first-round favorite. Like, they should win the series.
Just hearing you coughing a little bit there, I'm just reminded of Tony Gallagher's wonderful narrative of the St. Louis Blues all getting the flu because of Mellanby's kids, which was the only reason he felt they won that series. So you have to go into the Predators locker room and spread around whatever you've got, and you'll be the Canucks MVP. What do you think? I know that there's been a little bit of angst. Obviously, I think it's helped the Canucks that the Oilers reeled them in and has at least kept them a little bit sharper here. All sorts of talk over the last couple of months about what's a good matchup, what's a bad matchup for the Canucks. Obviously, they've ended up with what you feel, you've already covered that, what you feel is a favorable matchup with the Predators. But what are your concerns for this team going in? Obviously, since Pettersson signed his contract, I have seen a lot of the predictable lunkhead not looking at anything other than the numbers chatter that he's not producing enough and that he doesn't produce in big games and blah, blah, blah. You pointed out when they were in the bubble, his numbers were really good. Are you concerned about Pettersson's production? Are you concerned about Demko coming back off a long-term injury, even though he looked really sharp in his first game back? What are alarm bells that you want to see the Canucks take care of in this first round?
Well, yeah, I mean, the Pettersson question obviously is there. Like, did not have a terribly good second half. Even when he signed his contract, there was a little blip of performance, but he struggled. Now, he is finishing on a somewhat high note. He goal and 3 assists in his last 4 games. He obviously being paid to do more than that. And still 34 goals, 89 points on the season, right? Like, this is his second highest scoring season of his career. He was on pace for 100 points at one point. Maybe that was never sustainable. But, like, here's a player that has, even as he's struggled, I should actually say it's 5 points in 6 games, even as he's struggled, and he went through a long stretch there where he wasn't scoring. Even as he struggled, he was still finding ways to contribute, right? Like, There is definitely more, and this is not saying he's been good enough. I don't think he's been good enough, but he was still getting things done.
Yeah.
And so he goes into the playoffs, and that's why I found his response when I brought it up to him yesterday was so interesting, because he's a guy that sometimes he's a little bit defensive, not sure what you're going for. He obviously knows me well enough to know that I'm not trying to trick him or trap him into something. But nonetheless, you're always intrigued to see what the response is. And I sort of said, well, I just have one question, really. He goes, okay. And I said, does this have any relevance? Does this matter? Does this tell us at all about, what you guys, did you need, the sort of idea, you need to learn how to play in the playoffs? And he went, no, because of all the reasons, that others have said, and I've just sort of laid out, was that, just, it wasn't the same. It was a terrible experience. They got through it. It wasn't, there were no fans. There wasn't the energy. He's played in playoffs, right? He's obviously been an SHL champion, right? He's played in the World Juniors. He knows what big games feel like, and those in the end didn't feel like big games because there's nobody in the stands. This is going to be different, and this is a challenge, and so that's the challenge now for him. He's the star player. He's the guy that's going to be making all the money. He's got to go get it done, and he knows that. He does it in his own way. So yeah, the challenge is absolutely on there for him, and talk about a team that he can start off on the right foot. I mean, this is a team that profiles well for him to have a lot of success. They don't defend the middle of the ice well. Pettersson's a guy who plays, has always been at least been a good puck carrier in traffic. He hasn't been shooting as much as I think he should, but here's a chance for him to get some shots off and start things off on a high note.
It's funny. Mike Raptis does this wonderful feature for us,
Yeah,
Canucks This Week,
fantastic.
where he looks around the hockey world and what are they saying about the Canucks? And there's this paranoia in this market that, whether it's the Quinn Hughes, how could you dare not vote for him for the Norris? There's no other person, which I understand. But I think a lot of this, when you're looking for respect, it comes via playoff performances, right? Now,
Right.
we could probably do a 7-hour podcast on the 2011 team and why everyone else hated that Canucks team and why there was such this circle of wagons mentality around this team. But ultimately, you make your name with what you do in the playoffs. And it was an albatross that I think has weighed Marcus Naslin's legacy down
Absolutely.
a bit. But what do you remember of Trevor Linden? It's the absolute exhaustion in '94.
Yeah.
The famous picture of him and Kirk. Bure, for all the people who don't value him for wanting out of Vancouver, he was a massive playoff performer.
Yeah.
Was a huge part, obviously, the goal in Calgary, the elbow on Shane Churla. This was a guy that all when you think of great players, when it matters most is that's when they make a name for themselves, right? So I think now this is the opportunity, and based on current evidence, we know Quinn Hughes is going to be a beast in the playoffs. He's the most consistent Canuck I've ever seen in terms of level of performance at a high level. But I think this is, if Demko is lights out Demko, like people talk about bubble Demko, this is different. This is
Right.
you're right. You're handling the travel now. You're handling not just the fans in your own building, but you've got hostile fans in another building. Playing the same team over and over again. Who do you think will be a breakout player for the Canucks in these playoffs?
Well, maybe he's already broken out. I mean, the guy I've been going with is Connor Garland. I mean, he's had such a strong season. I think that the role that he's played, that sort of supplementary scoring forward, has been so important to this team. I think he's going to make a difference. I really think he will be a player that that can find his way to another level, and think of the bad stretch they were having in February, right? They couldn't win, they couldn't find really the goals they needed, and yet every night the guys that were there were Dakota Joshua and Connor Garland. I mean, I think Dakota Joshua is another example of a player who is going to thrive in this environment and take to the next level. I mean, you think about how hard he does things and how smoothly, how hard the things he does, but how smoothly he does them. He's not your typical kind of gangly big man. He's got a very powerful game, and yet it never looks troubled. And he just goes and does what he needs to do. And 18 goals. He would have had more than 20 had he not gotten hurt. Like those are two guys that are a huge part of the story. I mean, the big part of the story is the defensive play, um, but it's also about the fact that guys who aren't just playing with Pettersson and Miller have had success. Now, obviously, Garland has spent time with both of those centers, but Garland has also spent a long time helping to drive the third line. The fact that the third line, think about how long we've been talking about the Canucks need to find a third line. Connor Garland has done that, and I think he is going to be a huge story in this playoffs because of exactly that, the way he's been able to drive a third trio. I mean, to the point where I think he's I'm considering, I haven't put my ballot in yet, but I'm considering putting him on my Selke ballot because he's been that impressive as a two-way player. Like, I think he really deserves way more credit, and there should be way more talked about him than we're hearing, certainly outside this market.
Yeah. So you've already said you think Canucks in 6. I think it'll be Canucks in 5, but I did want to ask you, as we're setting up the playoffs here, how far can this team go? Can they realistically win the Cup, or do you think this is the year where win a round, maybe 2, and gain some experience, some younger players mature, and then next year it's on? Or do you think that they can do that this year?
I think realistically, I mean, this is a team that should win a round, given everything, certainly given the opponent. Once you start getting, into the division final, and then obviously beyond that, Canucks are going to be finishing. They're a top 5 team this season, right? Like they in the end, on the totality of the season, are in a deserved position. That was not, you break it down into 20 game segments. Not a lot of variance in terms of how they picked up or didn't pick up points. They picked up obviously a few more points in the first half, but it's a question of a handful of difference in the second half. It's a team that has, despite all the bounces and all the kind of dips and dives of the last couple months, they kept it rolling. And that's the big picture story here, is that this is a team that started hot. The heat was never going to quite continue, but they kept playing well and they've kept picking up points. So, yeah, I think they need to win a round. You never want to say you're happy with not winning the whole thing, of course, but they win a round. I don't think there'd be any shame in them going out in the second round or feeling like that their season was a failure if they don't get beyond that.
Yeah, I got to say, I think that I'm a massive fan of how Tocchet has handled this team, and it's like the team does have sort of his personality in terms of the work ethic, and he's a guy who obviously as a player did it all. I'm just, when you're in this business, it's funny. I slept overnight for tickets as soon as they beat the Blackhawks in '82. My dad drove me to the Coliseum and dropped me off, and I slept overnight to get Stanley Cup final tickets against the Islanders. I've been on that end of it, but when you're in this business, it's hard to be a fan because, number one, you're dealing with it objectively and impartially. But I just got to say, I'm just like thrilled for people around town and people that I interact with, whether it's in person or on social media or whatever it is. People are excited. They're happy. This gives them some distractions from some stuff that's going on. So that's why we're cranking up the coverage. So Patrick, great stuff. We'll await all your great files. You can go collect your posters, ask Patrick your questions for our Q&As after games. It's going to be fun. I hope we're even trying to track down some ghosts from the past. Don't want to give too much away, but we're trying to track down some historical figures because it's been a long time since we experienced this in Vancouver. So thanks, everyone. Go to theprovince.com, vancouversun.com for all this content. If you're watching us on YouTube, we appreciate that too. Leave your comments. We'll answer your questions whenever we can. And white towels, get them out, I guess.
See you next week.